It's important to understand that traditional ecological knowledge is related to our worldview and to our epistemology, which means that the traditional ecological knowledge belongs to the people that practice them. And even in the people that are practicing them, even within those communities, not everyone is privy to knowing everything. And so as people are trained and as they learn and as they participate in different aspects of the culture, they'll learn knowledge in that process. It also means that it's fluid, meaning that we're continuously learning, it's evolving and changing when the environment evolves and changes. And so it's important and it's valued because it's been something that's been here for thousands of years. That as we've learned about the environment over time, that it has been the way that we have stewarded lands. But it hasn't always been appreciated. And as a matter of fact, in indigenous communities, this knowledge was completely disregarded. Our worldview and epistemology was seen as having no value. We were seen as not doing anything with the resources. There's documentation and notes when different people would arrive and they would talk about how we don't use the land in the way that we should. And so traditional ecological knowledge hasn't always been seen in a positive light. But now that our communities have become desperate because of wildfires and because of climate change, there's more acknowledgement and recognition of this knowledge that we've carried for thousands of years. And it is true that we know and we understand, we know this place, we're of this place. I know the land land knows me, and that's why this knowledge is so valuable. But it's also important to understand that it's not something that people are entitled to. It's something that you learn through life, you learn through experience. If a group wants to share information, that information should be treasured and protected, but it's something that has been gained for thousands of years.
Our ancestors were smart, and they knew how to live with the world in balance, and they knew how to take lessons from the world and hand those down. And I think that a lot of traditional medicines are now being scientifically researched and backed and whatnot. But for me, it's because our people knew, and I'll even go I'll do this presentation called Living in Ceremony, and we'll talk about our people being fit by a byproduct of their lifestyle, because in traditional life, you've been out to Sumeg before, when you get into the houses, you gotta crawl. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you're in this world now, you don't see a lot of people crawling or on the ground. If it's very lowly. If you sit on the ground, you should sit on a chair, or what are you doing on the ground? Are you okay? But if you go to physical therapy, they're gonna put you on the ground and they're gonna make you move kind of like an animal and move like a baby. A lot of the ceremonies and a lot of the movement in the ceremonies and a lot of movement in traditional life and a lot of the food of traditional life is human specific movement that I would teach people on how to help themselves if they get hurt, or when people are sitting in their chairs too long at the desk and they have neck and back problems, hip issues. I'm teaching them things putting them in positions that we might already have been in traditionally, and they're doing traditionally in life, they were doing these movements in these positions so much that they were fit, they were mobile, they were they had the answers already, right? They didn't. And this goes honestly back into mental health and wellness too, as well, because I'll do this presentation, this QPR presentation, the question, persuade, refer, suicide prevention, and this mental illness, I feel is a new thing for us as Native people. So going back to who we are and going back to traditional movement, food, ceremony, prayer, the more it feels good. But it's also healing, and people are it feels good. It's well, that's what we're meant to do. That's who we are. And so when you get these small reminders, then it feels good, but then you have to keep doing that.
Well, traditional ecological knowledge is derived from a perspective. People call fire as traditional ecological knowledge. Fire is one spoke in that big wheel that we call traditional ecological knowledge. At the center of it is a mindset, is how do you think about land and how you use the land. And it goes back to traditional ecological knowledge. It goes back to how traditionally we've seen the land. It's quite different than just a fire or just a one aspect of knowledge. It involves a mindset, a psychological perspective that is significantly different than what Native people see. Currently, traditional ecological knowledge is adopted by the Forest Service, adopted by each of the parks, is taking care of it through one aspect of traditional ecological knowledge. I think how young people relate to the land is we need to stop. We need to look around and feel the presence of Ilaliquisha. And as we do, we need to understand that how non-natives view the land is different than how native people do the land. And I think it's important for younger people to understand a mindset, a psychological input that they derive from the land itself that is called traditional ecological knowledge. It's different than land ownership, that's different than Western thinking.
So think about where you are. You're in junior high school now, and you hear things about, so lots of ways of doing. People exploit resources, they work in harmony with resources, whatever that may be. But different ways of doing, different ways of seeing the world, different worldviews. And you have folks that will talk about traditional ecological knowledge. And let's go around fire. Fire is one of those things that Western culture is embracing now. So for years, since the 1930s, it was illegal to have these broadcast fires and have these large-scale fires on landscapes to remove brush. And so it went to suppression, and suppressing millions of acres of stuff, not using fire. Fire is thought of as bad. People punished for starting fires. And now you're at a period of time where you have forests that are overstocked. A typical redwood forest would have 30 to 40 stems per acre. You cut down the old growth, you seed it with firs, and now you have 1,500 to 2,000 stems per acre. Very dense, very dry, all the same age class. If something disease comes through, you've got a lot of wood standing. And when you do suppression, you never get rid of any of that understory or all that stuff that accumulates on the ground. So people start to think about prescribed burns, where you burn these areas intentionally and you do it with a low intensity burn. Western culture, prescriptive burns, you start at the bottom and you prepare a line at the top of a hillside so you can fight it, and then you let fire run up the hill. And you can think of that as, as prescriptive burns. Would you confuse that with traditional ecological knowledge and cultural burns? So cultural burns are typically done for a purpose, trying to propagate a certain species of plant, creating environments that are more attractive to animals. And what do those burns look like? Do you have a whole bunch of folks in a big bulldozer line at the top? No. You start at the top, you go with the contours on the landscape, you put fire there, you burn into the black, you go below it, you do another strip, you burn into the black. It's not about looking at fire as this thing that is dangerous, but looking at fire as it's a tool and it's your friend. And with traditional ecological knowledge, indigenous people all across what's now the United States and California, people use it as a tool on a regular basis. And that's something that there are still keepers of that knowledge, indigenous folks that have that. Go to traditional ecological knowledge and keeper of knowledge, a knowledge that's there. Now, does Western culture come in and say, hey, indigenous folks, what are you doing? How do you do this? Give me all your knowledge so that I can now use those tools and use this. It can't come in as a colonial domination. It can't be of a reclaiming of a culture's parts. It has to be more of a sharing. So when we think of traditional ecological knowledge, that's a worldview. That's a way of interacting with all the things around us. And there are practices that come out of that. Does everybody get knowledge of what all those practices are? Does everybody deserve that? Does everybody have a right to have that? It's indigenous way of thinking. We have responsibilities. People have responsibilities. They don't necessarily have rights to everything. And some of those benefits are earned. And they're recognized by community. And there are keepers of knowledge, and keepers of knowledge are honored. A lot of times you'll look at Western culture and it comes down to writing. Prehistoric, what's that mean? Pre-written language. Does that mean people didn't know things and have culture? Is anybody surprised that indigenous people are good orators? How did you keep knowledge? How did you pass knowledge down? You didn't have written text. You honored those people with good memories and good oration skills, and that's still prevalent in indigenous communities today.